On.
Well, good morning, everybody. Again, this is our Smart Future podcast with Dr. Marv Langston and myself, Jim Petrosini. And today we have the honor of Graham Plaster. Graham, welcome, and would like to have you do a little introduction of yourself, a little background before we get started.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on the podcast, guys. Real pleasure to talk to your audience and go down some of these rabbit holes that we're all passionate about. My background is I graduated from the Naval Academy in 2002, so right after 9/11, and went to sea on the USS Reuben James in the Arabian Gulf, supporting the Lincoln Battle Group, and came back to Hawaii, where I was stationed, and then had my second sea tour in San Diego, where I was part of Destroyer Squadron 1, overseeing the build out of a bunch of destroyers. Went from there to the Naval War College, where I was the assistant dean of students for 3 years, and I got a master's while I was there at Salve, Virginia, focused on social networks in Iran. So out of that, I got picked up into the Navy's Foreign Area Officer Program. So it's kind of the diplomatic corps of the military. Very small program in the Navy at the time, only a couple hundred FAOs were in the program. So I went to learn Arabic at DLI, and then I went to the Pentagon from there for 3 years in the Army staff, the G357, doing Navy liaison work for the United Nations. So traveled back and forth to Israel, Jordan, Kenya, Egypt, and Iraq for those 3 years, doing some liaison work between the United Nations, the State Department, and the NGOs that were there. Then I got out in 2013, started a company to build a social network for those who are in national security, and that company is called the Intelligence Community Inc. It's still going to this day, but really it exists more like almost more like a nonprofit, because it really provides a service to connect people rather than I would say a business per se. But out of that experiment as an entrepreneur, I started to do a lot of other things, and I worked at the Pentagon as a policy advisor for 6 years. I was a vice president of Alaska Data Corporation for about 2 years, and then I advised a bunch of tech companies that were trying to get into national security from the non-traditional space, and that brought me to where I am now. So just a month and a half ago, I started up as the director of Nautilus, which is a new public-private partnership between NavalX, which is the Navy's agility organization, and then DefenseWorks, which is a 501c3 in Niceville, Florida, which some people might know. DefenseWorks runs SoftWorks and a bunch of other innovation hubs that are in partnership with various government agencies. And so I'm really excited to be running Nautilus. I'm happy to talk about what we're going to be doing here and how that supports the Navy and Marine Corps missions.
Yeah, Graham, I think the first time I connected you was on the intelligence community. I was a member, and it was good stuff. Yeah, maybe drive down a little bit on NavalX and Nautilus, and kind of what some of the objectives of it is, and where it's going, or maybe over the next 6 months, what are the hot things that are going to happen with it?
Yeah, sure. We're still pretty early to some of the conversations, but the way it works is a public-private partnership, or a PIA, a partnership intermediary agreement, is a document that allows for the government to utilize a nonprofit partner like DefenseWorks to do all kinds of things and extend its reach and its capability. And so what DefenseWorks has traditionally done is to host a lot of events that are kind of matchmaking events that bring war fighters into a conference room with various tech companies, or maybe academics, or maybe even people from the national labs, or any of the innovation programs that you're all aware of, putting them all together in one space, do a little bit of design thinking and a lot of basically just hosting, the conversation. And out of those events, and we've run a lot of different types of events, and we have formats that we use. Out of those events, we gather metrics, we foster relationships and collaboration between companies, and then we provide recommendations back to the government. And we do all of that as a neutral party to the event. So, we don't have a dog in the fight. We're already forward funded by the government to do it, almost like it's a grant. and we step in and just host the events. So one of the events that we do is called a collaboration event, and that's basically kind of like invite a large group of people and come up with a new idea. And then another event we do is called an assessment event, which is government knows a little bit about what they want, so we kind of down select and we bring a smaller group into the space, and we start to drive towards an outcome. And all these events have worked really well for some of our other hubs, especially at SoftWorks. So some of your listeners might be familiar with that. And the best way for anybody to get involved with any of the events is to go to the website for the hub. And for us, that's Nautilus22.org. It's a brand new website. And just sign up on the form there. And that puts you in our database so that we can invite you for free to come to these events. So we don't charge anything to companies. It's basically all funded by the government.
Marv, any thoughts?
I was going to say fascinating background, and I didn't know about Nautilus22 or the defense excellent work that you're doing, and that it was operated in a grant format like that. So that's pretty exciting that the government's open up like that.
Yeah, it's not technically a grant. It's called a PIA, the Partnership Intermediary Agreement. And there is, if you go to Nautilus22.org, in the FAQ, you can kind of learn a little bit about what a PIA is. There are other organizations besides Defense Works that have PIAs with the government, and it's kind of a little known mechanism for engaging with the private sector.
And Graham, do they see like setting up like asynchronous comms? Will there be like channels? And again, what I'm finding this hybrid model after post-COVID, where I was just up at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Port Hueneme. They're only going into the base once a week. So, trying to get people together it's been a challenge. So I see kind of both virtual and when available on-site sessions, but definitely the ability to have some kind of collaborative environment would be helpful.
Yeah, the innovation hubs through COVID have done a blend of virtual and live events. And I think everybody, every company and every government agency has grown through this period to be more versatile, which is good for, I think good for leading organizations and good for technology. We're learning how to use technology more effectively through all the pain points. But when it comes to this, our particular hub, we are trying to get back towards live events, and we will certainly be doing some in the near future. And our headquarters are in Arlington, in Courthouse, and we have a relatively small footprint, just a couple office spaces over on Wilson Boulevard. And then we have the ability to actually lease space for events or utilize some of the smaller spaces we already have included in our package here at the industrial space.
Yeah, and we can. Go ahead.
I'm just going to ask, what are the key focus areas you expect to cover over the next several events?
It'll depend on the Navy and Marine Corps, what types of events they would like to do. We've had some initial conversations, and nothing's locked in yet, but they align with all of the core technology stacks that the Navy and Marine Corps are interested in. We are focused more on the smaller side. We're not going to be innovating the new submarine or the new missile system, but certainly anything in the autonomous world or the Internet of Things, it might be something that we bring companies together. And what's neat is that we can actually encourage companies to work together. If there's a way that you can synthesize technologies between different, maybe they didn't know if they put their two technologies together, they could produce a product that government wants. Or we also have the ability to do rapid prototyping. So if a company comes in and they have something, but it's not quite right, we can work with the Navy and Marine Corps to help them tailor it.
So Graham, any discussions to align with these DevSecOps software factories that are standing up? And there's Project Blue out of the submarine community. There's the Forge out of the Aegis community. Out here in San Diego, we have the Overmatch software armory for Project Overmatch. And we're seeing like Aegis wants to populate outposts across all the surface warfare centers. So those are the factories in theory that they'll be moving more towards platform as a service and software as a service, and trying to go faster.
Yep. Yeah, I think all of those initiatives are fantastic. So, I'm in regular communication with all the tech bridges for the Navy, and those all fall under NavalX and allow NavalX to have a great reach around the world to not only source technology from around the world, but also be in touch with the sailors and Marines and the pain points that they have around the world. So as far as supporting them or other initiatives that are designed to bring innovation into the Navy Marine Corps, we're all about assisting and supporting that. And if there are ways that we can collaborate on events, virtual or live, anywhere in the world, we're happy to have those conversations.
So how do you're only working with the DoD on this? Are you doing more work with the Army, the Air Force, or the Navy, or how is that shaking out?
So our baseline funding is coming from NavalX, but what happens is there are additional funding lines that can come in on top of the baseline, and they can come from anywhere. So if the Navy says, hey, we'd really like to do a collaborative project with the Army or Army Applications Laboratory or something like that, then they can come together and come to us, say we'd like to do a combined funding for a project. And then each project that we get funded needs to have some sort of problem set in it. Ideally for us, we don't engage with a project unless there's some sort of pathway. So if the government comes to us and says, we'd really like to find a solution for X, they're like, okay, if we found you a solution for X, is there going to be a pathway? Is there going to be some funding potentially? Not to make the government commit to say, yeah, we're definitely going to buy, but we say, well, if we bring it, we don't want to bring in a bunch of companies, spend their time and effort, and then they figure out how to tailor their technology for the government, and the government's be like, actually, we don't have funding to buy it. We love it, but we can't buy it. So all of the innovation theater that can happen around brainstorming, we want to avoid that. We want to just do the activities that are going to actually solve problems that get funded.
Do you find yourself competing with the likes of MITRE or Applied Physics Lab?
I mean, I haven't seen that yet. I did ask that question to some of the other hubs, and from what we've seen, I think there's some pretty good synergy with FFRDCs and the larger entities, just because they're not hosting the same types of events and they're not aggregating the companies. They might be writing some great research and aggregating information for the government clients, and then at that point, maybe some of their reports that they're writing have some overlap with some of the metrics that we pull out of our events, but they don't convene the types of events that we convene.
Have you run across Brett Vaughn in the AI side for the Navy?
I have not met Brett yet.
Well, you mentioned the bridges, and I think he's been involved in those bridges. He works over at ONR and with the Pentagon, but he's been the Navy's AI evangelist for the last several years and trying to work on massive innovation around AI and ML.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I've been on the working groups for ATARC, which for their AI working group and their quantum working group, which has had, back before the JAIC kind of was absorbed, has had a relationship with the JAIC to do a little bit of the advising there. And some of the tech advising I was doing before coming to this role was with AI companies.
So what are your thoughts?
I would love to meet Brett.
Well, maybe we can make a connection, but what are your thoughts on the change in the DoD level of this JAIC going over into the AI stuff going into the senior DoD level acquisition side?
I don't have a lot of depth knowledge about why the restructuring, but there's no doubt that AI will play a pivotal role in the future of warfare. So whatever they need to do to streamline, the organizational structure or the funding, I'm fully in support of that.
So Graham, just a thought, we're seeing like a huge talent acquisition problem across the Navy, both on the government and on the industry side. Any thoughts? Obviously the goal here is to educate people on technology and the trends and specific technologies, but maybe a subset of this is to kind of motivate people to kind of either focus on specific technologies or, you know, become gurus in AI, or take, you know, younger interns, or, you know, take junior level engineers, again, to try to retain them in our industry, right? As opposed to, you know, I started at Nywick Pacific and now I got an offer from Google. I'm going to go off and work for Google. So just maybe an offshoot of what you're doing.
Yeah, I've been kind of part of a little bit of the workforce of the future conversations over the last 5-10 years. And it's certainly the right conversation, because everybody knows, especially if in the defense contracting world, that it's a very limited pool of high-tech, high-cleared talent. If you're going to try to do things in cyber or really any kind of technology and want them to have high clearance, then you're going to be fishing the same barrel as every other defense contracting company. And I've had conversations recently with various people that specialize in clearances to try to figure out if there's any innovation around that you could bring technology to bear on the innovation on the clearance process to try to accelerate that a little bit.
Yeah, just add DocuSign so they don't, you know, you don't have to email a form and it takes 5 months to get the form signed.
Right. Anyone who's been through the process of trying to get a mortgage, pre-approved for a mortgage, you know that there are different kinds of low-level technologies that can accelerate some of the the process. So people that are very smart on clearances have been very aware of those problems for a long time. So I won't pretend to be an expert, but the workforce issue is a poignant problem, and it's an acute problem that could be addressed through some of the things that we're doing through DefenseWorks. So we do a number of STEM and STEAM programs at the high school level, and this is through charitable work that we do, because we're trying to cultivate the workforce and create talent pipelines. So, and we leverage a lot of, across all of our hubs, we leverage a lot of interns. So we reach into the university programs and invite, and a lot of the interns end up working for us full-time after they do an internship. So we see that as a great recruiting tool to bring tech talent and just patriotic people into that ecosystem. Generally, what I've seen is kids are interested in STEM if you engage them the right way, but if it's boring, when they're in high school, then they're just going to steer toward the thing that's the most interesting to them. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to kind of recruit. You look at how the Marine Corps recruits, at that level, and they've done it so well, as far as really stirring up the excitement, the adventure, the mission, the purpose. If we were to have some sort of JROTC program for cyber, and I have seen some of those types of programs piloted, that has the same ethos as the Marine Corps and really gets kids excited about STEM careers that serve the nation, then you could maybe steer some kids away from some of the Silicon Valley hype. But what happens is, if as soon as you muddy up your record with drugs or something like that, then you become unclearable. And then what are your opportunities? Well, you can go work for a tech company that pays you a lot better and doesn't care if you've had some drugs when you were a kid, right? So these conversations going on for a while. When I was at the Naval War College, I remember Admiral Mullins getting up in front of the whole War College and saying specifically, hey, we're, the Navy of the future that you guys are going to be in might look a little different. You might have some kids, sitting behind computers, fighting your war for you. And I'm paraphrasing, but, we've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah. We did a podcast with Nick Gamble last week from Uncork, which is a new startup with this whole no code mindset, right? So in theory, ensigns and lieutenant commanders on a ship could actually build an app, right? Because you don't need the right, low code. Yeah. So that definitely, and I know the Army's actually talking down at Army Futures Command about having, enlisted folks to be true developers, right, and develop. So that'll definitely shake up the industry a little bit if we get there.
Yeah, you run into problems with obviously the code itself, or the programs becoming acceptable in whatever CMMC or standards that we're trying to meet. So, I was just talking to Nick Miller from AWS the other day about AWS Marketplace, and he was pitching some ideas about creating an environment where you could do that kind of innovation inside of it. It's all approved and it's all basically ready to go. But I'm not much of a coder myself. I think the last computer programming language that I did was QBasic. So I'm just a wallflower when it comes to talking about some of that stuff.
Speaking of Amazon, you just triggered me. They just stood up a capability to do synthetic data generation for training AI models as part of their SageMaker program. And they're also heavily into the quantum computing, quantum telecommunication, and quantum key distribution activities. Have you got any thoughts on where that might fit into the future?
Well, I mean, a lot of the focus on quantum is on the encryption side, because obviously if you can do quantum hacking, you got to be able to do quantum defensive quantum hacking, and some people have said we won't have true quantum computing until you see all of the remaining Bitcoin being mined instantaneously, so we're not there yet. Some people will say the actual quantum computing is still a ways off. Now, quantum encryption, I've had to talk to a number of companies that feel like they're already there through different methods. But the problem is that, for instance, with symmetric encryption versus asymmetric, the method of doing the encryption might not actually have any governance standards to it or regulation around it yet. So, and once again, getting out of my depth a little bit, but I think the capability of quantum computing and quantum encryption is very important for us to talk about and explore. And it's certainly one thing that we'd love to get involved with, but it is a little further out. Some of the things that we'll be able to do at the hubs is stuff that's in the near future.
Yeah, I would. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, I would just say, I think if anything, you can get kind of this innovation back, where we kind of push the envelope. And Marv and I have been around a while, but like we kid of all this DevSecOps, we actually rode ships and wrote code on ships 30 years ago. And I bring that up and they go, what? But that, that's what the Navy was doing 30 years ago to build what today is GCCS. And I kind of go, why don't we just go back and do that? Why don't we put 20 developers on a carrier and build an app in a week? And and it just seems like some of the leadership just doesn't realize you can do that, right? Or they give you reasons why you can't do it. So if Nautilus can kind of push the envelope a little bit, again, for near-term things, right? We can't wait 5 years for new ideas. We've got to do it quicker. So that, definitely some lessons learned on that.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can do DevOps around the warfighter and the sailors and the Marines, then that's a win for the technologist. Is it to put the technology? That's one of the challenges we have with the SIBR process, right? In order to get, let's say I invented something in my garage in the Midwest somewhere, and I apply for SIBR phase 1 and I get 50 grand, and then my next phase is, okay, now go find somebody who actually would use this and get a letter of support. I'm like, how am I going to do that? Hopefully whoever's running the SIBR is going to be giving me some opportunities to meet some people and put it in the warfighter's hands so they could, look at it or kick the tire or whatever and say, you know what, I could use this. And once you get that feedback loop and maybe you need to do some additional prototyping on it, then you get to the phase 2, the phase 3, et cetera, or you maybe you take it in another direction, through an OTA. But if you can't do the DevOps cycle because the developer's too far away from the operator, that we call that the valley of death, but really I don't know if the valley is so much about contracting. It's oftentimes about culture. A lot of the people on either side, they just don't hang out in the same space.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there was nothing more motivating than sending a developer out on the Nimitz. He gets a cat shot. What developer can come back and say, I work for a company and I've had 5 cat shots in the last 2 months, right?
Right.
and I got to like work directly with a battle group commander to build an application, right? As opposed, you know, again, a lot cooler than some of the commercial opportunities. So I think just trying to bring that back, and again, that may rock some current cultures, but that might be an idea.
Well, I mean, I think that really is capability that the tech bridges, NavalX's tech bridges bring, is that they're out there sitting next to the war fighters, and they can, like I said earlier, they can listen to the pain points. They can kind of network with different tech solutions, and some of them have very specific tech, foci. So, different tech stacks, so they can drill down even deeper.
So Jim brought up a good point, that work that was done early on to what it has become the Geeks program for command and control. It was really funded by operational commander out in the field, Jerry Tuttle, who peeled off his operating funds to program early desktop computers to provide command and control the way he wanted command and control provided. It never had anything to do with the acquisition community till years later, when it eventually became a program of record. So from your perspective and where you guys are leading, perhaps the whole Defense Department would be better off if we started more activities straight from the operational side, used SIBRs and OTAs as vehicles to build prototype to production activities, and then not got the acquisition folks involved until way later, because they never tend to want to do DevOps with the real ops people. They tend to want to do DevOps with themselves and call that DevOps.
I mean, in my experience, I've known some acquisition people that really are excited by early stage stuff. They're excited by OTAs and SIBRs, and so I don't know. I wouldn't want to generalize about acquisition folks in one way or another. Certainly, if you look at Public Spend Forum and Ben McMartin and James Pitcher, and you guys probably know a bunch of them, there are some people out there that are real evangelists for innovation in the acquisition space. And so that gets me excited, because we've talked about acquisition warfare, and we've talked about innovation around the acquisition process is speeded up. And if you look back at some of my earlier podcasts, I remember talking to Pete Newell several years ago, and he said, he was in charge of the rapid equipping force for the Army for a while before he went private. He said, you don't just want to speed up acquisition, because if you just can buy things faster but are still buying the wrong things, then that's not good. So, there's a reason why we have a lot of due diligence around government buying, but, obviously we got to address the two functions. One is buying the right things faster.
Yeah. Or
you're making a great point, though, because we got into this do loop on acquisition because it took so long to acquire anything and field it. Then the requirements process decided that they had to make requirements exactly right. So they made these requirements that are take years and years to develop the requirements, and then we acquisition side make sure that they precisely build what the requirement is. And oftentimes you don't know what the requirement is that far in advance, and you don't know what the technology is going to be to support the requirements. So that's why I'm such a big fan of prototype to production, which OTAs and the kind of work you're talking about open up for us.
Yeah. I mean, people like to say that you're always building stuff to fight the last war you just finished,
Yeah.
And if you look at, Christian Bros's book, Kill Chain, one of his initial critiques is that we're always building platforms instead of capabilities.
Yep. Great book, by the way.
And that particular point, I think, is a worthy debate, because I think Anduril is building an operating system, right, for war. That's what they say. So the debate should be like, well, is that a platform or is that a capability? And those who build platforms, obviously, whether it's an aircraft carrier or something else, tend to dominate the industry, and so there is obviously an attraction to becoming a company or a group of companies that can build platforms. And there is some stability, I think, potentially in national security to relying on something like a platform because it communicates well. To try to boil something down to just saying it's a capability is, it's a nuance, but at the end of the day, you have to communicate what are we trying to achieve, and what are the tools to achieve it?
Yeah, I had somebody explain it's kind of like you have to have this co-opetition involvement where you have the large integrators who have the stability in the platform, but if you don't have the innovators that are driving them nuts and always challenging them, you'll get stale, right? So kind of kind of that fail faster model. I think that's the challenge. Have we been failing because we have an acquisition culture sometimes not to fail ever, right? And then we don't ever try anything new and we just keep doing the old stuff. So it's definitely a huge discussion, and maybe that's part of these NavalXs is start to do things where we can fail faster and throw out some new ideas that are just different.
Yeah, Defense Works, we're kind of on the risk profile. We like to, learn from our failures and not fail too often, because we're working obviously with government dollars. You have to take a calculated risk. And, if you look at DARPA and IARPA, their slogan is high risk, high reward. And so, on the spectrum of risk, you have moonshots and you have lean startup, and those are two opposite ends of the innovation spectrum. So a lean startup is to fail fast, fail forward. And then the moonshot is like, well, fail every single time, because we might win 1 out of 100 and that might get us to the moon, so both are valuable. We're probably somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. And we value both sides. We play with organizations that are on both sides of that spectrum.
So we've been going about 30 minutes. I wondered if you had any final parting ideas that you would like to share.
I just want to invite anyone who's listening to visit our new website, Nautilus22.org. And if you're a company or you're an academic, or even if you're just a transitioning veteran, please sign up for the email list. There's a button that says join the ecosystem, and you can become a part of that network. And if you're part of the network, then you'll most likely get an invitation to an event, and then you can start to participate in some of the things we're talking about as far as DevOps and providing solutions for sailors and Marines. And thanks again for the opportunity to be on the podcast.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I assume you're going to still do the Graham Plaster podcast?
I am. I have a bunch of backlogged episodes I need to upload. I haven't been able to do it over the last month and a half because I've been a little busy, but sometime on the weekend I'll get those uploaded, and we'll have a lot more. I have several good guests that I've recorded and some other ones lined up.
And how do people reach you to find that?
I'm all over LinkedIn. If people want to reach me on LinkedIn, that's what I do.
All right. Jim, you got any final thoughts?
No, thanks, Graham, and look forward to it. And if you ever need a place out in San Diego, we've got the facilities. So we look forward, maybe in the cold winter months of January and February, you can come back out.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'd love to collaborate in San Diego. I lived in San Diego and I miss it. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for the time. It's been an excellent discussion.